Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our second webinar Wednesday series. Today's focus will be on Wake Up from Your Shared Mailbox Nightmare, focused on the Workload Management app. Some brief housekeeping. The session will be recorded and will be available on demand afterwards. We will be hosting a live Q&A with our panelists today. So any questions that you do have towards the end of the webinar, if you want, you can pop them into the box at the bottom of the screen and we'll do our best to answer these. Should you have any Zoom technical issues or related questions, you can message me directly. And if we go to the next slide, Ellie. Thanks. Today's Unifii panelist includes Mike Gluck, who is our Managing Director. And then we've got Ellie Kleinworth, a Principal Consultant, and Jeevan Channa, a Senior Technical Consultant. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ellie.
Morning, everyone. So before we get started, we thought we'd give a brief overview of who we are. I believe most of you actually already know us, but we are Unifii. We've been a ServiceNow partner since 2010. We're our elite status. We pride ourselves in being the largest independent ServiceNow partner. We believe we have over roughly 150 staff now across four offices. Over the last year or so, we've won a number of awards, which we're very proud of. And yeah, so in regards to today's session, so we've found that over the last few years, we've been getting a lot of the same common themes and challenges across many of our customers, mainly being around how do we manage our processes, in particular when we use things like shared mailboxes or Excel spreadsheets to manage particular important processes within the business. So today we've got Mike and Jeevan who are going to talk about the journey that we took to find a solution for these issues. So today we'll start with Mike. So Mike, are you able to expand a bit further on how we came about with the idea of creating an app to solve the solution?
Sure, thanks, Ellie. So this really came around probably over work we've been doing for the last kind of 18 months with a couple of clients in particular, where they had both had very similar issues. They had very strong passion for ServiceNow as a platform, and the central teams were very passionate about rolling it out. And they were working with various elements of the business that were doing some simple workflow processes. So there was a sales closeout team that were responsible for globally processing all the closing down when somebody bought a new product, and a data quality team responsible for maintaining the data for client-facing and internal-facing products. So they both had a similar challenge. So they were using the shared inbox for their teams to take in requests and trying to manage that workflow and that workload through a shared mailbox with some Excel tracking, a bit of PowerPoint for reporting. I'm sure most of you on this session will kind of recognize that. So there were these teams, as ServiceNow often does, it gets a reputation being able to stand up simple workflow relatively quickly. So these teams reached out, but then the business, the ServiceNow team, quickly realized that actually there was a huge amount of value that the platform could add in delivering some simple workflow. But they were kind of caught within do they bring this stuff into ITSM request with all the attendant issues of having custom states and custom security and all those kind of things, which makes it very difficult to bring diverse areas of the business into request. Do they build custom using App Engine, the creator workflow licensing, which is a very great and easy method for doing this? But there were concerns around ongoing license commitments with an unknown future uptake. So if this was to roll out across 5,000 people in the business, how do they protect their license usage and hence their ongoing costs? And I guess the big one for them was, we'll touch on in a little bit, there was also some concerns around not taking ownership from a platform perspective, but actually for the ServiceNow team to suddenly be responsible for delivering business functionality which they weren't geared up for.
Perfect. So you've spoken about quite a few of the different business challenges. What would you say were, one or two key business challenges that we're looking to tackle?
So I guess there were two angles really, and just building on what we just talked about. So from the ServiceNow Central team's point of view, they were concerned around how if they were to bring this capability into, say, IT Service Manager under requests, or even into the creator type side of things and do bespoke. How do they prioritize the business requests, given an already big work stack around handling the enhancement requests, handling defects from current processes? How could they actually manage that priority? And any of you guys on here know, when you roll out the platform, one of the biggest challenges is actually around demand management. This stuff kind of goes viral pretty quickly, and actually handling the demand from the business, who are constantly asking for, can we have this, can we do that? The answer is typically yes, but it's actually, how do I manage it? How do I prioritize updating a business team's request process versus I've got an issue in my major incident process? So those kind of conflicts were a big challenge for the two ServiceNow teams that we were working. And these were teams that were had a decent budget and a good headcount budget, which really goes on to the second bullet around their other concern was, how do we get the business case to fire off for new headcount increases, to manage the taking on of responsibility for all these additional business requests. So I think that was the core for the ServiceNow teams, was absolutely wanting to help and a huge desire to help the business. And this is where the kind of conversation started, but being concerned around, if we take this on, how can we continue to deliver a good service to the business, and not going saying, yeah, we can do all this, and suddenly the business find that it's going to take 9 months just to get a change to a request updated. I think from the business team's perspectives, when we were talking with those guys, these are all, I'm sure, themes that you guys will recognize. They were managing multiple requests coming through shared inboxes. I think one team we talked to, they peaked at about 10,000 emails a month coming in to the team to go and help fix data concerns within, and these were within some financial products. So it was very critical that this stuff was correct. The inboxes would then fill up with conversations, who's picked what up, trying to manage things either in folders off of an inbox, or what's read and isn't read, and things being flagged for as important or not important. So that whole kind of, the reason we love and embrace ServiceNow as a platform around that simplified workflow, with all the things they were kind of struggling with. And it was also come down to the kind of typical things around, how do I then track the execution of that request if I hand it off to a third party, to another team? How do I know they've done it? How do I update the customer? How do I track my my kind of internal OLAs for making sure that gets done? And I think the last piece on that was around, there's been lots of time them having to produce reports for management. The classic thing where somebody spends a day every week producing an Excel and a PowerPoint to kind of be able to do a weekly report on the activities they've been doing. And that really led, when we poked under the covers with these businesses around, if they needed to make a case because a new product had gone out, which suddenly had a big spike in the number of issues that were being raised, it was very difficult for these teams to produce hard evidence that said, actually, our cases have gone up, we need more people. So to produce that business case, almost feel we need more headcount.
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember the reporting piece being quite key on top of their list. I think it was they spent about a month just doing reporting for the previous month. So yeah, definitely time consuming. How about we take a break here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a poll, and I want to ask the audience, do any of these business challenges ring true? You in your organization, you have the same challenges around mailboxes and Excel. I'm just going to launch that now. Perfect. So what I'll do is I'll leave that open, and we can look at the answers towards the end of the session. Okay. And Mike, what do you think was the single biggest benefit that we achieved by implementing a solution for this?
So I think it's probably a kind of a compound in a way of some of the things we talked about. I think the single biggest benefit was the ability to empower these business teams to actually, and Jeevan will talk a little bit more about how we've enabled some of these aspects, but really empower those teams to own their own process and own their own kind of work stack, to get them out of email, and to be able to get a much more organized, almost open their eyes to, you know, some very simple state sort of workflow and tracking and updates. I guess the things that in technology we're kind of naturally used to, but in a lot of the areas when you go out and talk within an organization, that is not necessarily an immediate sort of realization. Actually, that can make their lives a lot easier. So I think that allowing them, empowering them to have ownership, and then from a ServiceNow team perspective, I think it was really around for those teams to have the, you know, to see the business actually embrace and be able to use the platform and all the powers that it has, which they were very passionate about, but also contain the impact on them as a central team, in terms of being able to support, but also being able to federate ownership, and being able to allow the different teams who have very different kind of processes and very different ways of calling things, being able to customize that stuff without actually then impacting anything that was already in place. You know, some of these areas were cutting, you know, thousands of requests a month, so without impacting the actual IT stuff that was already there. So I think, you know, bringing something in to sit natively in the platform, but in a really nice, safe, segregated way, which is the beauty of using the scope store apps. And again, Ellie and Jeevan will touch on a lot of those benefits later. But really, that centralized platform. But I see these teams being able to come in and operate and run their own processes and manage their own lives, get out of email, be more organized, improve their, you know, speed up their time to do reporting, all those kind of really good things that they were being challenged with.
Yeah, no, definitely, and the federated management piece, I think, is one of the key pieces of this app, which Jeevan will cover very shortly. But before we get to Jeevan, I just wanted to quickly touch on ServiceNow store in general. I don't know if many of you are familiar, hopefully you are, but there is a ServiceNow store that's been running for a number of years, actually. ServiceNow have only really in the last couple of years really started to push more to the store, and actually that's essentially where they're going to be going. So, you know, in the past, for example, where you had to order you know, plugins or capabilities through Hive or directly in the platform, a lot of the new capabilities that ServiceNow are pushing now are going to be directly through the store. And essentially, in the end, I think that's where they're looking to essentially house everything in one place going forward. But as part of the store, you can go on and essentially look through hundreds of different applications that partners have built that essentially solve quite a few different key issues. And I think there's a lot of good benefits around considering apps on the store. The first one is being able to bring capabilities quickly. So essentially, because the apps are essentially built to, you know, essentially plug and play, essentially, you don't necessarily have to go through whole long lines of procurement, setting up a project team, spending, you know, 3, 4, 5 months going through detailed workshops and so on. It's a lot quicker to bring and adapt those capabilities into your platform. Also, in terms of best practice and development, so essentially every single time that an app gets either upgraded or submitted to ServiceNow, ServiceNow will review all the code behind it. So there's a very rigorous technical process ServiceNow will do. They go through the code, they make sure that it's, you know, been scripted in the right, for example, that it all hangs together in the right. And therefore, when you buy an app from the store, you know that it's had essentially that certified approval stamp from ServiceNow. There's no way around the technical piece. The technical piece is a prereq to getting an app on the store. So this is something that ServiceNow are very, very on. And the last thing, which I think is one of the most important things, is that as part of deploying app store, partners will have a commitment to make sure that those apps are recertified against every release. So you're guaranteed that at minimum will be upgraded twice a year in line with ServiceNow new releases, which will make sure that the app will work and function part of new releases. And in order to certify those apps, if for example we find any issues with the upgrade, we would have to fix it in order to get it deployed and approved for the next release. So it's quite a nice little stopgap there that it just ensures that the apps will have that maintainability over time. So now we will pop over to Jeevan. So Jeevan's going to go through in a bit more detail of what the solution actually is. So Jeevan, can you touch on maybe some of the key capabilities of the app?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ellie. So this slide here shows the key capabilities of the Workload Management app. But there are a couple that I want to really point out and dig a little bit deeper into. So the first one is the security model. The way we've built the app is around a role and service-based security model. So if you have the correct role or if you are associated with the service on the case itself, then you have the visibility for that case. This allows us to lock down the case to specific teams. So only authorized users are able to view and edit those records. It's very similar to how HR works in ServiceNow, if you've ever seen that before. And when I refer to service, you may be thinking about the CMDB service that we may see on incident records, for example, but Workload Management doesn't use any service relating to the CMDB. It's a separate table, a separate field, and we've done this to keep it separate from the IT configuration management in ServiceNow. There's no cross-pollination there. Workload Management is its separate app. The second capability is really a bit of a broader picture around the security model, and it's around the dynamic data model, the orange one you can see on the slide. So we all know about states in ServiceNow. Allows us to give that case a standardized process for everybody to use, but we've also implemented stages as well. And this really allows, as Mike touched upon before, not only different teams to own their own processes, but different teams to almost own sub-processes within those. So they could, if you have a team to work on one task and then a team to work on a second task through assignments and through security rules, those can be locked down. Only authorized users are able to view those records, which then plays very nicely into how those records are actually generated. So we have templates through service data, and then we can define which approvals and which tasks will be generated at specific times based on what type of information is inputted into that case. And the great thing about that is it's all service data, so non-technical admins can very quickly set up a new item, create the tasks and approval templates, and then whenever anybody raises a case from the portal, the system already knows which approvals to generate, which tasks to generate, and it does it automatically. And then the third capability that I want to touch upon is really more about how the app is built in general. So as Ellie mentioned, Workload Management app is a custom scoped application. It sits in its own scope in ServiceNow. It has its own separate tables, but those tables can be extended really easily. Each one of those tables is a new item type, which essentially allows you to not only track more or less any process that your company needs to, but multiple processes at the same time. You could have an R&D process being tracked through Workload Management at the same time as a sales process, at the same time as a GDPR process. And because you can really easily define which tasks and approvals need to be generated under certain conditions, you could have your own workflow for the R&D process, your own workflow for the sales process, all defined through data and running simultaneously.
So Jeevan, just touching really quickly on that then, so, and going back to the security model piece, so are you saying that because each different area, so R&D and sales, for example, because they each have their own area, what exactly does it mean in terms of the security model?
So because they have their own area, and it's worth mentioning the engine almost is already pre-built in the app, and then you define your workflow through the data. So they have their own areas. And in terms of the security model, as I mentioned, it's all role and service based. So you could define a role to say who needs to view the R&D cases, or we can define who needs to view those R&D cases based off the service. On the service itself, there are fields to define visibility rules, or simply, if you want to be a bit more simple, it could just be whichever team is assigned to the case at that time.
Fine. So essentially, you're saying that there's two levels. Then there's the first level is the overall table. So who has access to the work item? So for example, Bob in R&D, who has access to the R&D item, wouldn't have access to the sales work items. So I think that's the first level that you're saying, isn't it? And then I think perfect. And then I think the second level is we can take it a step further and make it even more granular you can make the actual services on the workload items as well. So for example, within R&D, if you had a particular service that was sensitive, for example, that not everyone in the company had access to, what you're saying is that you can even add further security onto the R table so that, Bob isn't part of a particular service or supporting a particular service, won't actually have access to those related items. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really touches upon the point of flexibility within the app. It's not just one size fits all. There's multiple ways you could lock down security, multiple ways you could define your workflows. So you could have, you can download this app and it can be suited best to your company. It's not static. It's very dynamic.
Okay, and in regards to the dynamic data model and the federated management piece, are we saying that, let's say John, who is the service manager for R&D, would he be able to go in and define and update his approval in his task workflows, for example?
Yeah, so as long as he has the correct access, and that access can be defined when you download the app very easily, then yeah, he doesn't need to be trained. As long as he knows basic ServiceNow, he doesn't need to be technical at all. He can go in, fill in a data record, and then he can define which approvals need to be generated and which tasks need to be generated.
Perfect. Okay, and you mentioned that the app is a scope app, but are we able to use any of the ServiceNow native capabilities? So for example, things like reporting, knowledge, for example.
Absolutely. So you're right in saying it is a scoped app, and sometimes we think of scoped apps as something completely separate. It's still within the ServiceNow platform, but we've enabled this app to talk to the rest of the platform as if it were kind of out of the box. So we can still leverage those functionalities, reporting, dashboards. We can leverage the self-service and knowledge. So the app comes with a dedicated portal and a service catalog and a knowledge base. So we can still use all of those. Workspace is also something that I really love to use. And we can use that with workload management. So absolutely, just because you're using workload management doesn't mean that you can't leverage those out-of-the-box functionalities as well.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So I think it'd be really interesting, actually, if you could take us through actually setting up one of the work items.
Yeah, sure. So you go to the next slide. So this short video shows how to set up a new item. So at the moment, it's showing in the tables table, the workload item is its own table. Just give it a second to load. And if you wanted to create a new process, it would really just be a new table that extends from the workload management parent table. Here is an approval definition. So I'm saying when the service is data quality, send an approval to the data quality support team. And I can fill in a condition, very simple, it's all data. Same with the task definition. When the data quality service is selected, send it to this assignment group and fill in the tasks with this information here. There are also multiple tasks set up in this demo here, which we'll see later on. Again, we can create our catalog item very easily, same out of the box, submit that from the portal, and then here we have our case generated with our approvals and our tasks at the bottom. Very similar to how request works and looks, but it's a separate scoped app, workload management, and it can be any process that your heart desires, really.
And so actually touching on this a bit further, actually, so here we can start to see the different stages, right? So is this where you mean we can start to have a bit of flexibility in processes and different departments, if you like?
Absolutely. So we have our normal states, but within those states, we can drill further down into stages. We can then define which teams need to be involved at different stages. We can report on those stages. We could have certain close codes as well based on those stages. So if a case is closed with certain information inputted, it will have a certain close code. And this way we can have multiple teams working on the same thing, on the same case at different points. And it's not messy, it's all very well laid out. So you know who's working on it at which time.
And just quickly on the workflow, actually, so in this example here, you can see all the tasks are pending an approval, but are we able to, mix and match? So can we have tasks, approvals, tasks? Does it matter what order?
It's all really based on the order. So when you define those approvals and tasks, you can have an approval, then a task, then maybe another approval. As long as you keep those orderings in the way that you want it to be, then yeah, absolutely mix and match.
Perfect. And then as part of onboarding this app, is there a need to do any coding, any scripting, or is it literally just a matter of setting up your data and your tables?
It's pretty much just request it from the store, download it into your instance, input some data to set up your processes, and then you're ready to go.
Perfect. Right. So you told us a bit about the app and how it currently works. What's next for the app? Is there a roadmap, for example?
Yes, absolutely. So if the next slide shows the roadmap. So we have an 8-step roadmap so far. These ideas have not only come from internally, but from existing clients who are already using the app today. They've come back with some feedback and said, we'd like this, we'd like that. So we've thrown that into the roadmap and we've come up with this. The first 3 I really want to touch upon. So extended guided setup, it's really just making the app even more easier to set up. So it's already very easy to set up, but if there's a guided process from the beginning to say, this is what you need to input, this is where you need to input it, then I think that would just make it a lot more easier than it already is. The mobile app, ServiceNow Mobile is a very powerful tool and it's used within the ITSM process. So to have workload management on the go would be really great. And it's definitely something one of our clients is looking to get into. And then task automation. So at the moment, you define your tasks when they need to be generated. But if we could have the system automatically generate based off the back of other tasks, there'll be no human intervention. Maybe, for example, if we need to update another system within the data protection team, that can automate out. And I think that would be really useful, make the process even more streamlined than it is. So this roadmap it's really just enhancing on what already exists. And yeah, I'm quite excited to get stuck into some of this actually to enhance the app.
Yeah, no, definitely sounds very exciting. Okay, fantastic. So just conscious of time, I think what we'll do now is we'll go to the audience and maybe do a Q&A. So everyone, if you do have a question, please definitely submit it in the answer box. We'll also touch on the poll actually. So everyone has actually submitted an answer now, and 92% of you all agreed that actually this is a shared challenge within your organization. Okay, so actually let's start with this first question then. So Mike, why wouldn't we just use Request ITSM? Why would we go with the app instead?
So I think we've touched on a few of those items, but I think there's 2 sides to it. There's a technical side, which is the complexity of bringing the business into the request process, taking account of maybe people needing different fields mandatory at different points, not just on the cat item, the shop window, but actually in the back end process. And how do you know, I've been there myself, where you make changes in that process and suddenly you update a mandation, or you make something mandatory, and suddenly everything that's in train becomes mandatory, and it kind of kills the process. So to the speed that you can roll that stuff out typically takes a lot of time, a lot of regression testing, and then you're back into that release cycle. So the whole concept here is to free people away from that and to give them the freedom, as Jeevan was touching on eloquently, around every team managing their own world, but with that backbone of all the platform functionality. And I think the other one is really from my experience, it's the ownership piece. And this isn't a people not wanting to stand up from a ServiceNow team perspective and support the business, but it's that almost that unwittingly suddenly being responsible for, if you take the R&D, or actually the GDPR use case is a really good one, suddenly taking ownership for ensuring that those requests get processed, making sure that those things get updated and that the tasks and approvals are going to the right place. So suddenly starts skewing the R's and R's within an organization. And as I touched on at the beginning, the ServiceNow team suddenly, you know, being responsible for 3 or 4 major business processes or business outcomes that are needed out there without the headcount, without actually the team to do it. And that was really at the nub of the real conversation we had, particularly with one client, was I really want to help. I know the platform's the right idea. These were pretty much paraphrased, but pretty much her exact words. I really want to help. I know the platform can resolve it, but I don't suddenly want to be responsible for all of the business processes, which they want to change every fortnight. So that was that got us thinking about how do we, that kind of push-pull piece, how do we manage that? And I think there's, you know, if I take the question slightly wider, yes, there are things like the cat item designer, and in the early iteration of that, I think I can't remember what it was called, but there was the first version a few years ago. I think the challenge is suddenly you're into somebody, again, it's targeted at request, and people have to know how all of that hangs together, and you're going from a single ticket with some tasks. So we've got into suddenly that 3-tier request RITM, so a catalog task kind of concept within ServiceNow, all of which have a state model. So the complexity goes kind of through the roof and really gets too much for the business. Can say, well, I just want a thing, and I want to get somebody to do something, or I want to make an approval, and that was kind of the heart of why we did it. And I've seen clients if we go back a few years, where they tried to control access, but given people the cat item designer, before they knew it, they had 500 new workflows appear in the system. And we're trying to manage, you know, a request process with, you know, I think they had one client had 700-800 items, and they had 500 separate workflows, and that, from an administrative platform maintenance point of view, is just absolutely impossible. As everybody on here know, you know, trying to, you know, if you do any changes on task or anything at that kind of core level, then trying to regression test that level, even smoke test that level of items is really impossible, and you make a huge kind of rod for your own back, and very quickly build up a lot of technical debt. So I think, you know, yeah, so ITSM is great, but I think let's keep, in my head, if I summarize really quickly, is, you know, let's keep IT for IT, because that's where that request process is really driven at delivering new laptops, at delivering access to software, all those classic technology pieces. And the same reason why, you know, HR is now off on it as HR SD, is a great self-contained with that data model that supports the HR world. What we've tried to do is kind of echo some of those concepts, but build it out for these kind of discrete teams out there in the business that have this need for, I just want to execute somebody's request, track it, and be able to report on it.
Perfect. And actually another question for you, which is, how is the application broadly licensed? Is it per traditional fulfiller, user, or even process based? And actually, I think this is one of the benefits for us as a partner being on the store, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. So we've like most apps on the store, it's kind of price on application, and that's deliberate. What we have is a lightweight value assessment, and don't worry, you're not going to have 5 consultants turn up and try and convince you that you need to spend £1 million. But it's really around understanding where the value is in the organization, what your roadmap is in terms of rollout, how many users will be involved. And we've initially laid it out on a fulfiller basis, mainly because that's the route that everybody understands. Everybody within ServiceNow understands. There is levels beyond which then we'll just do an enterprise level. So we'll do a whole organization. You can go and use it wherever you want, do whatever you want with it for an enterprise cost. But the thing Ellie was alluding to, one of the main benefits, I think, from a partner to a client perspective is we have complete control of the pricing in the store. So we can actually have any model that we want to roll it out, a bit like no different to the Apple Store or Google Play or any of these things. It's people can in-app purchases, or they can charge for the app up front. So that means that if we have a client that commits to a certain license value at one point, we can change that through the life cycle of the license, so that it we're not stuck with that 3-year fixed, this is what it is, the 7%, 10% uplift type concepts. We can actually we want to work with you guys and actually understand the requirements and build the right licensing model that is going to actually help support the rollout and adoption across the business. And I think one of the challenges with other ways of doing this is, and I touched on it, is when there's an unknown uptick, and I've been with clients around certainly a lot of the, if you look at discovery and a lot of those kind of elements that are on the per unit basis, it's a bit of a black hole. I don't know what my pricing is going to be in the future, so therefore committing to a per head price now for the next 3 years, if I triple that number, that's going to blow my business case out of the water, or that's going to incur a huge cost to us. So what we've tried to do is make it a licensing model that generates revenue for us for obvious reasons, but also that kind of works for you guys and helps you scale it up as you scale the usage.
Perfect, thank you. I've got another question. I think actually, Jeevan, this one, we can direct this one to you. So you mentioned the roadmap, but how often are you pushing updates to the store?
Yeah, so we have the ability to, so we develop the app internally, and then we can push updates out to the store very easily. So again, if you have the app downloaded in your instance, you can download those updates whenever they're available and whenever you want. Again, as Mike said, very similar to how you would download an update for an app on your phone. We do aim to update the app at least once a year. But the more clients using our apps, the more ideas we're getting from them, and then the more enhancements we want to build. And so personally, I see that maybe a little bit more, but yeah, at least once a year.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think to add to that one as well, we're just working with a client now who are going live with it quite imminently, and as part of their transition into go live, did request a number of enhancements, which actually we thought actually would be very good for the app itself. So as part of that work, we took those on. So I think it's also worth noting that this is our key roadmap for new capability, but there are enhancements that are also being resolved or implemented under the covers as well. And those will get pushed out through patches or major or minor releases.
Yeah, and I think there's a trade-off, isn't there, guys, around we certainly won't want to be updating something every 2 weeks because it becomes impossible for everybody to manage. So I think there's a desire for us to get on maybe a quarterly release cycle. So we, as well as the two ServiceNow releases, we got the option to drop out functionality sort of in between those, and that would feel like a good option for people to be able to adopt without drowning people in constant updates. I think you touched on it, Ellie. It's clear to all that have been in this world for a while, the ServiceNow more and more are pushing out more and more functionality and feature updates through the store. And it started off with things like in SAM Pro around new vendor packs and HAM Pro around new vendor packs coming out. But I see more and more actual key capabilities, key integrations that would normally be resolved for like a major release are actually coming out from the store. And what we hear from ServiceNow is that's only going to increase. So to try and get a bit more dynamic and try and get a much more of a fluid environment, and so really getting to the point where those major releases are much more about core platform capability, where they're messing around with some of the core internals or brand new net new features that they want to make a big song and dance about, but a lot of the internal improvements, as we want to do, will actually be coming out through the store.
Okay, perfect. I think that's all the time we have. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. If you do have any more questions, or if you want to get in touch to maybe go through the app in a bit more detail, do reach out to us, and we can definitely get that scheduled in for you. So Sam, back to you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Did an awesome job. Thank you so much for attending today's session. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email that should come out to you tomorrow, and that will contain a recording link of the webinar today, a feedback survey, a free ebook, and the opportunity to book a free strategy session with one of our team from Unifii. We'll also be announcing and opening registrations for episode 3 very soon, and that will be on reporting part 2. Once again, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We hope you found it insightful, and we look forward to hosting you again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.